So we have a treat today. Dr. Pathak is a board-certified ophthalmologist, and I already quizzed him about making an appointment for my husband. Anyway, he's a board-certified ophthalmologist specializing in the treatment of cataracts, glaucoma, macular degeneration. He was raised in Orange County and attended the University of California at Berkeley. Subsequently, he completed his medical training in Chicago. He has been practicing ophthalmology in Long Beach since 2010. He now provides eye care services in his private practice, which is called Lucent Vision. And the doctor actually brought cards for you, and I have them in the back if anyone should need it. Thank you.
Thank you. Can everybody hear me? Fantastic. So my name is Dr. Pathak. Good afternoon. I hope you're all enjoying your lunch. I have been an eye doctor here in Long Beach for over 7 years now, and most of my patients are seniors. And so I have a particular expertise in eye problems that seniors face day in and day out. And I am very passionate about eyes. I love eyes. Some people have eye phobias, but eye trivia, eye knowledge is something that I just love. So if there's anything that I can impart on you during this talk, it's that your eyes are really, really important. And taking care of them is very, very important. If you ask the average person on the street what they would rather lose, their life or their vision, most people would tell you they'd rather die than lose their vision. So I feel like taking care of your sight is very, very important. So first of all, we're going to talk about today some things that are very common problems that occur in people over the age of 50 as your eyes get older and older with time. And so the first question is, well, I have this nice little comic to start things off here. So this is somebody taking a trip to go see their eye doctor, and you can see that they definitely need to get a new pair of glasses. They've managed to crash right into the front of the store here. So why do our eyes age? What is it that causes the aging in our eyes? There's a few things in particular. The first thing is UV. That's the sun. The sun's rays are actually pretty harmful for many parts of our bodies, but in particular our eyes. And that's from the front of the eye all the way to the back. The second thing is wear and tear. So needless to say, you use your eyes all day, every day. And if you think about how many days that adds up to by the age of 50, by the age of 60, even a car can't last that long because you're using that eye every day, so many times a day, and that wear and tear leads to changes in the eyes. The third thing is hormonal changes. I'm sure that there are people in this room who understand what hormonal changes mean. And so one of the big hormonal changes that occurs in the eyes in particular is that your eyes don't produce enough tears, and a lot of people develop dryness in their eyes, and that's often related to some of these hormonal changes. And there's other parts of your eyes that are also related to your body's natural hormones, and those things change as we get older. The fourth thing is tissue elasticity. So I know all of you have seen a rubber band before, and if you use a rubber band again and again, sometimes the rubber band loses some of its elasticity or its bounce back. And something similar happens with your eyes. If you all can maybe imagine the eyelids that are surrounding your eyes also have that same type of elasticity to them. And as you get older, as the elasticity is lost, sometimes we get drooping of the eyelids, or the lower eyelid gets a little droopy or a little wrinkled, and that's all related to that loss of elasticity. So those are some of the main things that cause aging in the eyes. There's a few things in particular I'm going to talk about today. Cataracts, macular degeneration, glaucoma, and a problem called ptosis, which just means droopy eyelids. And I know that a lot of you have probably heard of some of these terms before. Maybe some of you actually have these conditions or are being treated for them. But these are the most common things that we see as ophthalmologists in the senior population. Here's a neat little comic just leading up to our cataracts talk. So this young lady here is saying, people my age can still have stars in their eyes. They're called cataracts. So, what are cataracts? Cataracts, to begin with a normal eye here. So this is a normal eye here, and in a normal eye, light rays usually come to the front of your eye. They go through a lens, which is this little clear lens right here. And That lens, what it does is it basically focuses light rays onto the back of your eye here. As we get older, over the age of 50, what happens is that lens, instead of being crystal clear, turns into this cloudy muck. So it turns into a more cloudy lens, almost like having frost on the windshield of your car. And that makes your vision more frosty and cloudy over time. It doesn't happen overnight. Usually it occurs over the course of many months, many years. And that progressive vision loss is what people notice when they have cataracts. Here's another picture of cataract, so kind of hard to tell here, but this is your pupil, and through the pupil it should look totally black and transparent. And in this eye you can see there's a whitish, snowy appearance in there, and that's from that cataract that's developed over the course of time. And so, what are some of the symptoms that people complain about? So in my patients, the most common thing that people complain about is foggy or cloudy vision. And this gives you a sense of that right here. You see normal vision with these two young children here, and then right next to it you see how cloudy and blurry it looks. Another very common thing that people complain about is nighttime driving. People will say that when they're driving at night, the lights from the oncoming cars hurt. They cause so much glare. Or they have trouble reading the street signs when they're driving at night. And speaking of driving, sometimes cataracts can get so bad that they can make you fail your DMV test. As a matter of fact, that's the reason why a lot of seniors come to see us, because they failed their DMV test, and something needs to be done to get their vision to be better again. And another common thing that cataracts cause is a change in the way you perceive colors. And most people don't even notice this, because the cataracts come along so slowly over time that your brain just kind of makes up for your deficiencies. And so oftentimes, once people have their cataracts treated, after the procedure, they'll say, you know, I can't believe the colors that I'm seeing. I used to think that my house was painted red, but it's actually purple. Or I'll have those types of complaints. It's pretty amazing. So the biggest risk factor for cataracts is your age. So if you're over the age of 50, slowly but surely you will develop cataracts. There's no way around it. And I know some people say, well, my mother or my grandmother didn't have cataracts. She probably did, but her brain probably got used to the cataracts causing that blurry vision. She just functioned in spite of the cataracts. But everybody gets them. Some people get them faster. Maybe they'll get them in their 50s. Some people get them later. Maybe they'll get them in their 90s. But ultimately, everybody will have a cataract. There's no way around that. Just like everybody's going to get white hair, same thing is going to happen with your eyes. You're going to get cataracts. But there are a few things that tend to make cataracts more accelerated. And the number one thing is diabetes. Diabetics tend to have cataracts earlier in life, and those cataracts tend to be worse too. Other things that can kind of accelerate cataract formation, the big one here is use of steroids. I don't know if there's anybody in here that has a problem called COPD, which is where you take oral steroids to help you breathe better, or if you have asthma and you take oral steroids, or if maybe some people have certain types of arthritis where you have to take oral steroids. Those types of oral steroids cause cataracts to form faster. So that's another thing to look out for. And our old friend UV damage is a big one. So baby boomers or people who are now going into their 60s and 70s, back when they were growing up, we didn't really understand how bad UV was for your whole body, let alone your eyes. And so nowadays, that's one of the first things I tell my younger patients, to make sure you wear sunglasses whenever you're outside. So how do we evaluate cataracts? The biggest thing is you got to see your doctor regularly. So you should be seeing an eye doctor at least every once a year. And that way they can evaluate whether you have cataracts or not. And the other thing is, when you do see your eye doctor, you want to make sure you tell them all the things that are bothering you. If you're struggling with reading, if you're struggling with driving, if you're struggling with watching TV, can't see the small print on the TV, it could be related to the cataracts. And that's something that your eye doctor needs to know. And usually when you come to see an eye doctor, they'll do an examination called a dilated exam. What that means is they'll put eye drops in your eyes that make your pupils big. And that allows us to see the cataract more clearly. And it allows us to evaluate whether you need to have something done for that cataract or not. So what can we do to treat cataracts? The first thing, sometimes when cataracts are early, updating your glasses prescription can sharpen up your vision. And sometimes it's as easy as that. But usually cataracts will get to a certain point where even updating your glasses is not going to fix the problem. And so a lot of patients will ask me, well, is there a drop I can take? Is there a pill I can take to help treat the cataract? Because nowadays when you go to your local Rite Aid or your local Walgreens, you might see an eye drop there that says cataract treatment. But the fact is that there are no eye drops, there are no pills that have actually been proven to treat cataracts in humans. And so really the only treatment, unfortunately, is something that's surgical. That being said, there are some studies being done in dogs and in cats where they're using a certain chemical as an eye drop to help cataracts go away. And there's a couple big studies in the last couple of years, in 2015 and in 2016. This is from a dog study, and there are some before pictures here and some after pictures here. So, for instance, you can see here a cloudy cataract right in the center, and then the after picture after they use eye drops, the cataract's gone. And so it looks good on dogs and rabbits and other animals, but they did a recent study in humans and they found that it doesn't quite have the same effect. So we may be a few years away, but someday in the future I think it's possible that cataracts might be treated with eye drops. We're just not there yet. And so our number one way of treating cataracts is the S word, which is surgery. And so I want to start with this little comic here. This is one of our friends, Frosty the snowman. And Frosty's friends warned him of the risk, but in the end he decided to go ahead with laser eye surgery. And you can see Frosty unfortunately didn't have a very good outcome with the laser eye surgery. But at any rate, surgery is really the only way that we can fix cataracts. And it's a very effective and safe treatment. The question is, do you really need the surgery? Some people ask me, well, do I really have to do it? Do I really need it? And my answer to that is usually, if you're having trouble reading, you're having trouble driving, you're having trouble seeing your loved ones, you're having trouble doing your normal daily activities, then it is a good idea to go forward and consider having a cataract procedure done. Is it safe? A lot of patients are, of course, afraid. You know, it's your eyes. You don't want anybody messing with your eyes. But the fact is, it is indeed very safe. It's actually the most commonly performed procedure in the United States today. And so we have a lot of experience with it. And the outcomes are fantastic. And it's really, really rare for somebody to have a really bad outcome or a complication. So it is indeed very safe. What is the process like? So usually it's an outpatient procedure. You go home the same day. And usually it takes about 20 minutes or so to do the procedure. Most people can start to see pretty well by the next day. So it's a very rapid recovery. Are there any folks in here who've had cataract surgery before? Oh boy, we got a bunch. Okay. So all you have to do is turn to your neighbor and ask them. So you have a lot of people in here who have it already. And then nowadays we are starting to do the procedure with the laser. That's a newer technology, and that allows us to do it a little bit more quickly and more precisely and a little bit more safely. And the future is very exciting as far as laser surgery goes. So, any questions so far? We'll have a question and answer at the end, okay? So the next big thing I'd like to talk about is macular degeneration. And I'm sure a lot of you have probably heard the term before. What is macular degeneration? Well, first of all, you have to understand what the macula is. And if this is your eye here, and we take off half of your eye so you can look at what's inside, the very center of your vision in the back of your retina is a little tiny spot. And that little pinpoint spot is called the macula. That spot is really important for your central vision. It's important for your color vision. It's important for your ability to read, your ability to recognize colors, and your family members. It's all dictated by this one little spot in the center of the back of your eye. And if we lay it out and look at it, it looks sort of like this. Hang on 1 second, I just want to make sure I have a really good light here. Yeah, so here, this is where that macula is. This is a blown up picture of the retina, the back of your eye. And so this is a normal retina here. And you can see this is the macula here, and this is something called a nerve. We all have one nerve in the back of each of our eyes. And these are all normal blood vessels here. So when people develop macular degeneration, what happens is, instead of having a nice, beautiful, normal-looking macula here, we get this, where you get a bunch of little yellow spots in the back of the eye. Those little spots are little areas of wear and tear. And that wear and tear builds up over time. And slowly but surely, in a lot of people, what happens is, once those spots build up, they can lead to bleeding. So this picture actually has a big clump of blood right in the center of the macula. And that bleeding and that damage to the center of the macula, that's what causes vision loss in macular degeneration. And it's just an age-related change. There are certain things that make you more likely to develop it. People who smoke, much higher risk. If you have high blood pressure, you have a higher risk. And most importantly, if you have a family member, a mother, father, brother, sister, who has macular degeneration, your risk is much higher. So there's definitely some genetic component to it too. So having a family history of it is definitely something to be aware of. And so, what do the symptoms look like? In people who have macular degeneration, oftentimes it's their central vision that starts to get worse. So this is in a normal eye. You can see the young boy nice and clear. Whereas in people where they develop macular degeneration, you can see the center of their vision starts to black out. And not only that, but when they're looking at grids of lines, they start to notice little curves in those grids of lines, and those curves get worse. So this is a very common presentation in people who have macular degeneration. Their central vision just starts to get progressively worse over time. And by progressively worse, I mean over the course of years. So how do we treat it? Prevention is obviously important. So if you can eat a healthy, balanced diet, wear sunglasses for UV protection, that can reduce your risk. And when people do have a diagnosis of macular degeneration, oftentimes their eye doctor will tell them to use over-the-counter vitamin supplements. And you can usually find those at your neighborhood Rite Aid or your neighborhood CVS. There's a couple big brands. These are a couple of those brands here, Eye Caps and Preservision. These eye supplements have been proven in big studies to help people who have macular degeneration. Now, a lot of my patients who don't have macular degeneration will ask me, hey, you know what, if I take these eye vitamins, is it going to prevent macular degeneration? And the fact is that there's no evidence that a normal person taking these vitamins is going to have any benefit as far as macular degeneration goes. So I really only recommend them for people who actually have that diagnosis of macular degeneration. And in some people, as the macular degeneration gets worse, sometimes they'll have bleeding in the back of the eye, kind of like the picture we saw before. And in those people, nowadays, we have a really effective treatment, which is using injections in the back of the eye. It sounds kind of scary to inject anything into the eye, but it's very, very effective. And it works over the course of time, works well, but it needs to be maintained over time. And I don't know if there's anybody in this room here who's had that type of an injection, but it's typically not very painful, and it's usually not as bad as people would think. And the future is bright in those types of medications and treatments. So the other thing I wanted to talk about today is glaucoma. So has there been anybody in this room who's been told they have glaucoma or who's being treated for glaucoma? Probably a handful, sure. So glaucoma is a very common disease in people over the age of 55. And what glaucoma is, it's basically an elevation of pressure inside of the eye. So all of our eyes, this is a normal eye here, all of our eyes have a pressure. And it's different than your blood pressure. So one way to think about it is, if your eye had no pressure, it would probably just collapse. And if it had too much pressure, it would just pop. So it needs to have a nice little range of pressure, and that range typically is between 8 and 21. And that pressure is very carefully maintained by your eye. But in some people, once they get past the age of 50, that pressure system stops working. And when it stops working, the pressure builds up inside of the eye. Right here, you can see it says pressure, and it's building up inside the eye. And as it builds up, it pushes on the nerve back here. We all have one nerve back there. And when that nerve is very delicate. And when the pressure gets elevated, it pushes on that nerve and causes damage to that nerve. And over time, over months, over years, that nerve starts to die away slowly but surely. And that leads to vision loss. So that's basically the way glaucoma works. So one way to look at it in the back of the eye, so this is a photograph of the nerve in the back of the eye. It's very magnified here. The real distance between here and here is about 1 millimeter or so. So this is a very blown up picture for you. And you'll see it looks nice and pink. And these are all normal blood vessels here. When somebody has glaucoma, what happens is the center of the nerve starts to die away, and that leads to this whitish discoloration, this paleness. And as it keeps getting worse over time without treatment, the whole nerve can turn pale. And what that means is the nerve is basically dying away, slowly but surely over time. And so whenever your eye doctor looks into the back of your eyes and takes pictures, if you have glaucoma or if you're a glaucoma suspect, this is what they're looking at. They're looking at the nerve to see if it's turning into this. And this is the last thing we want to see, a nerve that looks very pale like this, because that means that the nerve is basically not functioning anymore. It's died away. And we want to prevent that. So what are some risk factors for glaucoma? I know we talked about age. Anybody over the age of 50 really is at risk. Ethnic background. Interestingly enough, people of certain genetic heritages tend to have a higher risk, namely people who have an African American background, people who have a Hispanic background, people who have a Northern European or Scandinavian background. Alaskan Eskimos tend to have a higher risk. And we don't really know why. It's something that's genetic. Other things that can raise your risk are family history. So if you have a first-degree relative, a mother, father, brother, sister with glaucoma, your risk is 6 times higher than the average person. So if you have that type of family history, you got to make sure you see an eye doctor and make sure you get screened. And then another thing I really wanted to talk about is a lot of people say, hey, well, you know what, I have high blood pressure. My doctor's treating me for hypertension. I'm taking blood pressure medication. Am I at a higher risk of having glaucoma? Because it only makes sense. Hey, if I have high blood pressure, I probably have higher pressure in my eyes too, right? But that's not the way it works. The two pressure systems are independently controlled. So just because you have high blood pressure in your body doesn't mean you're going to have high pressure in your eyes. And the other way around is also true. If you have high pressure in your eyes, it doesn't mean that you actually have high blood pressure. They're two different things, and neither of them is dependent on the other. So what happens when you have glaucoma? And this picture is actually a little bit small here, unfortunately, but basically, when people have glaucoma, what happens is they tend to lose their peripheral vision all the way on the outside. And most people don't really have any symptoms. Usually people won't have symptoms for a long time until it's very advanced. And typically you'll lose the outer vision, you'll lose it, and eventually you'll be left with just a little central tunnel of vision. And if you continue to not have treatment, you'll lose even that center portion of your vision, leading to complete blindness. As a matter of fact, it's one of the leading causes of blindness in the world. It's, I think, 2nd or 3rd worldwide, and it's one of the leading causes of blindness in the United States also. And what makes it so dangerous is that most people don't really have any symptoms. And when they don't have symptoms, they think everything is fine. But unfortunately, once the vision is lost, we can't do anything to bring it back. So that's what makes it really dangerous. There's no symptoms usually, and once it's there and it's become advanced, we can't reverse it. All we can do is keep the vision that you have, and whatever's lost is lost. So that's why it's so important to be screened for glaucoma and to use whatever medications your eye doctors tell you to use when you have that diagnosis of glaucoma. So common treatments. The most common treatment is eye drops. And I know there's some folks in here that are probably using some of these eye drops. They're typically covered by your insurance, and they are very effective. In the last 20 years, we've developed some amazing medications for glaucoma, and they work very well. Most people really only need one eye drop once a day, and usually that controls their eye pressure well enough where they don't need anything more than that. And that'll preserve their vision for the rest of their life, typically. Once in a while, we'll have people where eye drops are not enough, and in those people, sometimes they'll need a laser treatment, which is usually painless, usually only takes a couple of minutes, and it's typically covered by the insurance, and it's typically very effective. I'd say about 85% of the time it works well. And then once in a blue moon, we'll have folks who need the S word. They need surgery just because all these other treatments have failed. And so we have to do something to protect the vision, and usually that something is surgery. So the last thing I wanted to talk to you guys about is a problem called ptosis. And I know some people in here have probably already dealt with this problem. If you remember my telling you, the skin around your eyelids tends to get a little bit, loses its elasticity as you get older. And as it loses its elasticity, it tends to become droopy. And in some people, it can droop so much that it can cut off your vision. It can make it look like you have shutters that are covering your eyes. And in those people, sometimes the only treatment is surgery. And that surgery involves basically raising your eyelids surgically so that your eyes open up more and you can see better. And that type of surgery is generally covered by insurance. And a lot of folks develop this ptosis problem. It is one of the most common things that we see in seniors. Here's another little comic here that I like. So there are some age-related issues that I cannot help you with as an eye doctor. So Esther here has misplaced yet another pair of glasses. And you can see in her little beehive hairdo, she's got like 6 or 7 pairs of reading glasses. I can't help you with your memory, unfortunately, but I can help you with your eyes. And really, that's all. This is my 2-year-old here enjoying some blueberries. Thank you all very much for listening. I tried to keep it short and entertaining, so if there's any questions, feel free to ask. I will try to go from left to right, and I will repeat the question so everybody can hear. So this young gentleman up front here.
Would it hurt to take the eye drops even if you don't have glaucoma, like the preventive maintenance?
So the question is, can I use those eye drops even if I don't have glaucoma, just as a preventive measure, so I don't have problems with glaucoma in the future? Is that right? The answer to that question is, typically we don't recommend doing that because those eye drops have their own side effects. So in particular, sometimes those eye drops can make your eyes look very red. They can really irritate the surface of your eyes. And not to mention, they are very expensive, and your insurance wouldn't cover them if you didn't have a diagnosis of glaucoma. And there's no evidence that taking the eye drops in advance will prevent you from having a glaucoma in the future. You may still get it. But then it would become masked because we wouldn't really be able to measure your pressure. We wouldn't know that your pressure started off high. So very good question, but the answer is no. We typically don't recommend using eye drops as a preventative measure when it comes to glaucoma. I think there was another question over here. Yes?
Yes, I have a twofold question on the macular degeneration.
Sure.
There is a wet and a dry, is that correct? One is maybe irreversible, I'm not sure, and the other is, which is which?
So the question here is about macular degeneration, and she pointed out a very interesting fact. Macular degeneration is actually split up into 2 main types of macular degeneration. There's a wet variety and a dry variety. So, and the question is which one is worse and what's the difference between the two? So dry macular degeneration basically just means there's wear and tear changes in the retina and the back of the eye, and usually there's no real treatment for it. It's just something that we have to watch, and it just gets worse over time, and we can't really do much about it. There's another variety which is called wet macular degeneration. That variety involves having actual swelling in the back of the eye. That's why it's called wet, because there's actually liquid that gets stuck underneath the retina there. That variety can be treated, and usually it's treated by using the injections I spoke about earlier. And using those injections can typically improve the vision. But at the end of the day, both of those types of macular degeneration typically lead to vision loss. But one big difference between the two is that in people who have dry macular degeneration, sometimes their dry macular degeneration stays very early and doesn't really impact their vision much over time. Whereas anytime you get diagnosed with wet macular degeneration, you will probably have some type of vision loss down the road. There's no way around it.
And the other part of the question was, my husband had an injection.
Sure.
But it wasn't, I don't think, dramatic. It was, he had retina tears. It was very close to the detachment. That has nothing to do with the macula, or does it?
So great question. So this young lady's husband had an injection in the eye for something called a retinal tear. So the retina in the back of the eyes is typically a very, very thin membrane on the back of the eye. One way to think about it is it's almost like wet tissue paper. It's very thin and delicate. And once in a while, there can form a tear in that thin membrane. If that happens, it can lead to dramatic vision loss, because then the entire back of the retina can become detached. And so once in a while, what a retina doctor will do is they'll actually inject a special type of gas into the back of the eye. And that gas, what it does is it creates an air bubble inside of the eye and it pushes the retina back into place. So that's entirely different from macular degeneration. And it's a great way to treat these types of retinal tears without actually going to the operating room.
Yeah. He had a number of tears, so he was.
So that's, you got lucky.
Yeah, he did.
I have another person here. Yeah.
I've used Mercedes for 2 years, and now my eyes water a lot. So can I just do it once a day?
So the question here is about an eye drop called Restasis. So by a show of hands, how many folks in here have a history of, not by accident, how many people here have a history of dryness in their eyes? Probably a lot. So one of the most common eye drops used for dryness is a drop called Restasis. And what that drop does is, over time, it boosts your eye's ability to make its own natural tears, so you're not as dry. Once in a while, when that happens, people have too many tears. And if that happens, sometimes the excess tears can bother you. So the question is, can you cut down on the Restasis and only use it once a day? You know, to be honest with you, what I tell people about Restasis is, it's similar to working out. If you work out, you have to stick to it. So you only get a result if you do it for many weeks at a time or many months at a time. Once you stop, you go back to where you started. And Restasis is the same way. If you cut it down or if you use less than you should, you will probably start all the way where you started in the beginning, which is you'll be very dry. And in general, I find that people are more comfortable when their eyes are a little bit watery versus being really dry. So to answer your question, I would stick with what you're already doing instead of messing with it.
Hard on the makeup.
It's hard on the makeup. So eye drops, medicated eye drops can be hard on the makeup, but they're good for your eyes. I think I had a follow-up question here.
You said some things that you detect, and you said cover, and what else?
So in people who have, what are we talking about, cataracts? Or? Oh yeah, okay, so the question is, the center of your vision, the area called the macula, what is it responsible for? It's responsible for your color vision, your ability to see shapes, your ability to see faces, to read. All those things that you do every day are taken care of in that tiny little space that's about the size of a pinhead. It's that tiny, and it's in the back of your eyes, and that's really what determines your ability to do all those things. Pretty amazing.
Wow.
I had a question here. Yeah.
Well, all these different opinions. I asked my eye doctor what supplements are good, he mentioned Gilbert. And he had heard. And then there's this new, Whitaker and Newport Beach who sells his own brand of eye vitamins. He claims that they don't wear and blah, blah, blah. And then somebody else told me that the one, the popular that's advertised on TV is not that great. But some famous companies.
Sure, Bausch and Lomb Preservision.
One of those, I don't remember the name. So I don't know what to do.
So,
Joe's eye vitamins, but they're not as strong as, I think Whitaker's newsletter, he's not, stuff that I don't know.
yeah. So the question is,
Something, because I already had cataract.
so the question that this young lady has posed is kind of a tough question to answer. There are a lot of eye vitamin supplement companies out there, and a lot of people that claim that if you take this or if you take that, it will protect your vision, or this will help with your cataract, or this will help with your macular degeneration. The fact is, most of these supplements that you get over the counter are actually not approved by the FDA. The FDA is the government's agency that makes sure that all these things are safe for you and that they actually help you. Most of them are not even tested by the FDA. And so sometimes some of their claims can be really hard to prove. My personal feeling is that I only recommend supplements in patients where I know there have been some studies done that demonstrate some improvement. And out of those, there's really only two in particular that have actual data and big scientific studies behind them. One of them is the Octivite or the eye vitamins we were talking about before. Octivite is one of the brands. Another brand is Preservision. Those are good, but only in people who have a diagnosis of macular degeneration. Because when they did the studies, they found that those were the people that benefited. Nobody else actually showed any benefit. So you know, if you take them in the hopes that you'll never get macular degeneration, maybe that'll happen, but there's no evidence that that's the case.
What about large amounts of zinc or vitamin A?
So zinc in particular is also one of the things that you'll find in the macular degeneration supplements. And that was actually also studied in one of the larger studies, and it was found to be protective in people who already had macular degeneration. Large amounts of vitamin A I would be careful about because there's two things with large amounts of vitamin A. Vitamin A can come from a source called beta-carotenoid, which means that it's derived from a special type of, it's a chemical that comes from carrots actually. And that chemical in people who have a past history of smoking or any types of cancers can actually raise your risk of cancer. And so I'm very careful when it comes to those types of supplements. The other supplement that I recommend to a lot of my patients that actually has a lot of evidence behind it is omega-3 fatty acids, or fish oils. There's been a lot of study on that, and in the eyes in particular, it has shown to reduce the amount of inflammation on the surface of your eyes. So in particular, in people who have dry eyes, it tends to work very well. And there's a lot of evidence that it's also good for your heart and for your brain as well. One caution that I will give you is that some people who are on Coumadin or Plavix or other blood thinners should probably ask their doctor first before taking it, because it tends to thin your blood out a little bit. But to answer your question, I think those two supplements, the Preservision or eye caps for macular degeneration patients and omega-3 fatty acids in people who have dry eyes, those are really the only two things that actually have true evidence behind them. Everything else, I don't know. Maybe it helps, maybe it doesn't, or maybe they're just trying to sell you something to make a buck. I don't know. They got another question right here.
I was wondering if these conditions you're talking about necessarily occur in both eyes at the same time. It could be one eye.
Great question. So the question is, all these conditions that we've spoken about, do they occur in both eyes or do they occur only in one eye? In general, when it comes to glaucoma, typically it's in both eyes, but it can be asymmetric, where one eye is worse than the other. Cataracts, it'll always be both eyes. Macular degeneration, typically it's in both eyes, but usually it's asymmetric, where one eye is actually worse than the other. As a matter of fact, sometimes in people with macular degeneration, it may start out bad in one eye and start to get better in that eye, and then a few years later, the same thing will happen in the other eye. So that's the more common way we see macular degeneration. But typically, all the things I spoke about today, in general, are both eyes. I got another question right here.
You talked about oral steroids creating a problem. What about inhaled steroids? Like if
Great question. So one of the things we spoke about earlier, so the question is there a difference between the oral steroid and the inhaled steroid as far as how it will affect your eyes? If you remember earlier, we spoke about steroids that are taken orally. It can impact, it can cause you to have cataracts sooner, it can cause you to have glaucoma sooner. And the fact is, people who take inhaled steroids have a lot of those same risks. I have many patients in my practice who take an inhaled corticosteroid who develop cataracts because of it. As a matter of fact, I have one patient who was taking one of those for years and had not seen an eye doctor in many years, and I ended up seeing him, and he had very advanced glaucoma. No family history, and most likely it was related to the steroid usage, which was just inhaled, not even taken orally. So any type of steroid you take, whether it's inhaled, orally, injected, all those steroids wreak havoc with your body's natural ecosystem, and they throws things off. And it doesn't just affect your eyes. Those types of steroids elevate your blood pressure, they elevate your blood sugar, they can make your bones more brittle. So steroids in general, can be very helpful, but they can also be very damaging to certain parts of your body. Topical steroid, that's a good question. Typically, topical steroid is such a low concentration that it typically does not get absorbed into your body enough to cause these problems. And I think I had a question right up here.
Having one condition with your eye, are you more likely to have some of the others?
Great question. So this young lady asked a question about whether having one condition makes you more likely to develop the others. In general, the answer to that is no. In general, just having glaucoma doesn't make you more likely to have macular degeneration, doesn't make you more likely to have cataracts. But I will tell you, I have a lot of patients who have multiple conditions at the same time. That's very, very common, where I'll have a patient who has a cataract and also has glaucoma, or people who have macular degeneration and also have a cataract and need treatment for both. So that's a very common thing that we see. I have a young lady over here.
Can eyes be transplanted from one person to another?
So this is a very common question we get in our office. Can I get an eye transplant? And the answer to that question is not yet. We can transplant certain parts of the eyes. So I'm a cornea surgeon myself, and so I do corneal transplants. That's a part of the eye that we can transplant. That's kind of like the windshield of your eye, the cornea. That I can fix. But some of these other problems that occur, for instance, with glaucoma or with macular degeneration, they occur in parts of the eyes, the retina and the nerve, that we cannot transplant and we cannot change. But I anticipate maybe someday, 30, 40 years from now, we might be able to do that. But right now, it's not possible. It's too complex. I have a question back here.
I have an aunt and an uncle who got wet macular in their 80s, and then my brother this past year got wet macular at 62, and he got it in one eye first. Within a couple months, it was in the other eye. Is it unusual for it to move that fast, or?
So the question is, can macular degeneration move quickly from one eye to the other? And you know, the answer to that question is it really varies. In some people, at the time of diagnosis, they will actually have it in both eyes at the same time. And in other folks, I'll follow them for years and they'll have it in one eye only, and we won't see it in the other eye for another 5-6 years. So it really varies. So it's not unusual for your brother to have a 2-month interval between one eye and the other. That's not unusual.
Is it unusual for him to be that young?
No, that's also not unusual. I would say anybody over the age of 55 is fair game, especially in your case, your brother's case. He has a family history of it. And so there's some genetic predisposition that he has. He's more likely to get it. And whenever people have a family history and they do develop that illness, usually it occurs earlier in life and oftentimes tends to be worse, just because there's some sort of genetic underlying mechanism for it to happen. Does that make sense?
Yeah, now all my cousins are worried that we're all going to get it because my aunt and uncle have it, now my brother has it.
Well, you know, I think, so the question is, you know, is it possible that, that more family members will get it? It's possible, and that's why I encourage you to see your eye doctor regularly, eat a healthy, balanced diet, wear those UV protecting glasses when you're outside. Those glasses you have probably have a UV coat on them, so when you walk outside, they'll probably protect you just fine. If you do those things, don't smoke. That's a big one. Smoking and macular degeneration, it is a known link. It is definitely going to make your macular degeneration worse if you have it.
What if you smoked in the past?
Nothing you can do about that. Nothing you can do about that, but it will definitely raise your risk if you smoked in the past too. So I have one question over here.
I would like you to have me explain the floater. I never heard you talk about that today.
Sure. So there's a question here about what is a floater. Show of hands, how many folks here have noticed floaters before? Little squiggly lines? Oh boy. That's pretty much everybody. So, great question. Let me see if I can put up bring up a picture here. That'll help me explain it to you a little bit better. Okay, so in the back of our eyes, so if this is your normal eye right here, the inside of all of our eyes is not empty. It's actually filled with a jelly. That jelly is called vitreous. And that jelly normally, it makes up the entire inside of your eye, and the rest is empty, but that jelly is what makes it up. Sort of like a grape. The grape has the outer skin, but the inside has this jelly type grape material in it, and it's similar to your eye. What happens as we get older, past the age of 50, is all that jelly inside of the eye tends to clump together. And that's called the vitreous detachment. That's the fancy term. And it clumps together. And when it clumps together, then it starts to float around inside of the eye, and it casts a shadow on your retina. And that's why you notice it more when you're outside in a sunny conditions, or if you're looking out at the sky, that's when you'll notice it. And it's very, very common. And in most people, it's benign, meaning it doesn't need to be treated. And usually what will happen is your brain will get used to it. Your brain, it's sort of like if you move your couch in your living room, for the first few days you'll trip on your couch and bump into it. But after a week or two, even in the dark, you'll know where the couch is and you'll walk around it. And your brain is really smart that way. It'll figure it out. And that's basically what a floater is. It's usually a benign clumping of the jelly in the back of the eye. A common way that I like to explain it to patients is if you had a snow globe, you know how they have snow globes, a little castle inside, and it's got the snow floating around inside, and the snow settles to the bottom, but when you shake it up, all that snow is floating around inside. That's what's going on inside of your eyes, except that you don't have that many pieces of snow. You have only a couple pieces in there, but that's the basic idea. I think there was a question over here. Yes?
There is. I had, I'm diabetic and had cataract surgery, probably about 5 years ago. The week after I had the surgery, everything was perfect. But after that, I lost focus, near focus from my right eye. And basically the test more or less proved that the lens that they put in, the girl, or the, I'll say girl, that measured it out across all the hills for that area made a mistake, and they gave me the wrong lens. So is there any way that that can be changed or corrected?
So that's a great question. So the young man here is asking, he had a cataract procedure, and apparently there was some sort of mistake made, and the lens that was placed inside of the eye was not the correct lens. So let me just give you a little background here. When we do a cataract surgery, if you remember, this is the way the cataract looks in the back of the eye. When we remove that cataract, we actually have to replace it with an artificial lens. And that artificial lens is typically made out of either acrylic or silicone, and it sits there for the rest of your life. Without that artificial lens, you couldn't really see anything. It's really important to have it there. And all of our eyes require a slightly different power of artificial lens. Just like everybody's glasses are slightly different in how strong they are. Same thing, this lens is slightly different in its power. So it sounds like in his surgery, they may have put the incorrect power of lens in there. And there are a couple ways to go about treating that. One, the most basic way is just use a strong pair of glasses, which is going to be kind of annoying for you, but an easy way to fix the problem. Second thing would be to actually go back into the eye and remove that lens and put in a brand new one, which is usually a really complex surgery and maybe not the best bet. And once in a while, we can also do something called LASIK. I'm sure a lot of folks in here have heard of LASIK. That's a procedure where we actually reshape the cornea, which is the front of the eye, the windshield right up front here. If you reshape that windshield of the eye, sometimes you can make up for the incorrect lens. So those are the main ways to go about trying to treat that. But boy, that's frustrating to hear. I'm sorry that you had that type of an experience. I have another question here.
Yes, I've seen 4 different ophthalmologists. Basically, we changed medical plans due to my husband's employer. The one that I've had for many, many years said I had glaucoma. I am very nearsighted. My eyeball is very elongated. And when I went to another medical plan, they said I did not have glaucoma. Don't take the eye drops, you don't need them. And then we changed back to the other medical plan, and they said, yes, you do have glaucoma, take the eye drops. So is it to protect, because I'm very, very nearsighted, I've had cataract surgery, but is that a preventative thing because of my stretched retina to protect it, to go ahead and say I have glaucoma, take the eye drops?
It's a good question. So this young lady has been told by a couple different doctors. One doctor says she has glaucoma, one doctor says she doesn't, one doctor says she needs drops, the other says she doesn't. So, you know, it's kind of a tough thing for me to tell you what the right thing is to do, but what I will say is, much like many other professions, there's an art to what we do, to what doctors do. And so if you were to go to your local museum and look at a painting, you may have 5 people tell you that it's beautiful and 5 people tell you that it looks like trash. And it's the same thing here. There's a little bit of an art to all the pieces of the puzzle. So what I look at is the patient's lifestyle. I look at any previous testing that they've done in your eye, whether that eye drop made any difference in your pressure in the past. And based on some of those little pieces of information, some doctors may conclude, yes, you need to use the eye drop. And other doctors will say no. But as far as whether that eye drop will protect your retina in the back of your eye from any kind of problems because you have a longer eye and a more stretched out retina, no. That eye drop will not have any impact on your retina. What they're trying to do, those doctors that are telling you to use that eye drop, they are trying to make sure that you don't develop vision loss from the glaucoma in the future. And they're playing it safe is one way to think about it. They're just playing it really, really safe. They're saying that, hey, you know what? The risk of vision loss is big enough that we think that burdening you with this one eye drop once a day is probably not going to change your life too much, so we think it's worth it. Whereas the other doctors are saying, well, you know what? Your risk of glaucoma is so low that we think that the burden of using this eye drop and the cost is not worth it in your case. So there's 2 different ways to look at the same problem. And I couldn't tell you which one is the right one, but that's why we sometimes come to different conclusions when we see the exact same thing. Yeah.
I had cataract surgery done several years ago. I had dry eyes, and I take drops twice a day, but my left eye waters all day long.
Oh.
Is there anything I can do for it?
So we have a young lady here who has had cataract surgery, uses drops for dryness, but she has a left eye that tears a lot all day. So tearing is not a simple problem. There are many different things that can cause tearing. So it could be related to dryness. And now a lot of patients will tell me, well, if my eyes are dry, why are they tearing? And the reason is, when the surface of your eye dries out, it sends a signal up to the tear glands above to make extra tears. And those extra tears are a little too watery. And they're not like your normal tears. So instead of lubricating your eye, they just run down your face. And so that's how dry eye can sometimes cause tearing. So maybe your eye is still dry. So maybe having some further treatment for that dry eye might be helpful. But once in a while, people tear too much because the tear gland, all of our eyes have a little tear duct right on the inner corner of our eyes, where a little tube takes the tears from your eyes down into your nose. Once in a while, that little tube can get blocked. And if it gets blocked, there's no place for the tears to go down into your nose. So instead, they stick around on the surface of your eye and they just fall down your face. So that's a possibility that maybe you have a blocked duct there. Those are the two things that I can think of just off the top of my head as to why you might be having tearing still in that eye. I have another question right here.
This is sort of of your presentation. I certainly have a separated retina. Other than trauma, what would cause that also? Research in that?
So we have a person here who is related to your sister, whose sister had something called a retinal detachment. That's what a separated retina is. It's a retinal detachment. So a retinal detachment basically means that, so inside of your eye, on the inside back here, there's a thin lining, which is called the retina. And in some people, that lining can come torn off the back of the eye. And when that happens, it usually causes really, really severe vision loss and usually requires emergent surgery. So the question is, how did that happen to this person? And is anybody else in the family at risk of this problem? So the most common reason why people get retinal detachments is no reason at all. It's just a random thing that happens. But there are certain things that make you more likely to get a retinal detachment. People who have a longer eye, so meaning if you have a much higher prescription, if you're very nearsighted, or you have to hold things really, really close to you to be able to see them well, people with that type of an eye are at a much higher risk than your average person of retinal detachments. And there may be, we do believe that there is some family link also when it comes to retinal detachments. So yes, it's possible that maybe a brother, sister, mother, father of that patient has a higher risk of a retinal detachment. And on top of that, because she has a retinal detachment in one eye, she has a higher risk in the other eye than the average person. But I will tell you, most common reason why people have a retinal detachment is no reason at all. It just happens. It's spontaneous, which is very frustrating for patients because they don't know what they did wrong, and they didn't really do anything wrong. I got another question here.
Once you've already had the cataract surgery, you have the artificial lenses, what does that do to your risk factors like the UV, etc.? And can those artificial lenses eventually deteriorate?
So great question here. We're talking about the artificial lenses that we put in the eye after cataract surgery. The question is, how do those artificial lenses impact the risk factors for all these other problems that we spoke about today? And do those artificial lenses last? Do they degenerate? Do they need to be changed? So when it comes to those artificial lenses, the first thing I'll tell you is that once that lens is in, you will take it with you to the grave. And it will not get ruined. It will not get rejected by your body. It will not break down. It will not stop working. So that's the next thing I was going to answer. Those lenses nowadays, depends on when you had the procedure done, but nowadays the newer lenses actually have a UV coating on them. And so they will help filter some UV that goes into the back of your eyes, which is really great. Reduces your risk of, for instance, macular degeneration. But just because there's a UV filter on that lens doesn't mean that you're going to get UV protection for the rest of your eyes. So a very common thing we see in seniors is cancers of the eyelids. And those cancers of the eyelids occur because of UV damage. And so if you have a lens inside of your eye that's protecting the back of your eye, it's not going to protect your lids. And so I still recommend UV protection in those folks. But it does reduce your risk of macular degeneration. That's a very good, good point that you made. As far as things that it could possibly risk to make it worse, the risk of having a retinal detachment when you have an artificial lens is slightly higher. And by slight, I mean maybe 0.001% higher. So it does raise your risk a little bit. but it is a very, very tiny risk. And it's well worth that risk because of the improvement in the vision. So I hope that answers your question. I got another question right here.
The development of the pressure in the eye, does that happen gradually? If it does, if it comes at the early stage, can it be prevented from becoming worse?
So great question. So the question here is when people have an elevation of the pressure inside of the eye, which if everybody remembers is called glaucoma, the question is, does that pressure go up slowly over time or does it happen very quickly? And if you catch it early on, can you prevent it from getting any worse with time? So to answer that question, whenever the pressure starts to become elevated in somebody who has glaucoma, it is a slow process. It does not happen overnight. It is not something where you wake up one morning and all of a sudden the pressure is going to be elevated there. It's usually something that occurs over the course of many months, many years usually. And to answer your second question, if we find that elevation of pressure early on, let's say, but that being said, it's really hard for us to know when it actually came. But if we're able to measure it and say, hey, you know what, we found this within the first year, within the first 6 months. If you start using glaucoma eye drops, yes, you can prevent it from getting any worse down the road. Definitely. So having early diagnosis in people who have glaucoma is very, very important. Just like it is in people who have cancer. If you have cancer and that cancer is found very early in its course, your options for treatment are much better. And your risk of having it spread anywhere else is much lower if we find it early on. And the same thing goes with glaucoma. We like to find it early so that we can get it under control with an eye drop. And then, nowadays, since our eye drops are so great, if we find the glaucoma early, most likely it'll never have any impact on your vision down the road.
So when you go for an eye exam every year, you know that distance from year to year, will they be able to test that right away?
Yes, they should. So the question is, if you go for an annual eye exam, will they be able to see differences year on year? And yes, they should. They should be looking for that. Absolutely. But usually, I will tell you, to further talk about that question, usually there's not, in people who do develop glaucoma, usually there's not a huge difference going from one year to the next. It's usually over the course of 3 or 4 years where we'll notice a trend, where the pressure might be going up slowly but surely, and that's when we take action. Sure, she's just taking the floor here.
What was the hypersensitivity tonight? I have that problem, so even if the sun is not as strong, I cannot keep my eyes open. I always have to have dark glasses. And it's kind of, even though with the dark glasses, because the sun is very strong, I can keep my eyes open. It's not dangerous.
Of course. So the question here is, this young lady says that sometimes the sun seems really, really bright to her. She's very light sensitive. Light sensitivity is a very common complaint that we get. There are a few things in particular that can cause light sensitivity. Cataracts are a big one. So cataracts tend to cause glare. If you've already had a cataract surgery, then maybe that's not the answer. Other things that can cause light sensitivity, one of the most common ones is actually dry eye. People who have dry eye tend to be very sensitive to light. And there's a lot of different reasons behind that, but that's a very common reason. Another reason why some people are sensitive to light is no reason at all. So some people are just more sensitive. Just like maybe some people might be able to tolerate hot chilies better than others. Some people can tolerate light better than others. And it just seems to me that maybe your body is just kind of made in a way where you just happen to be more sensitive to the light. And they do make there's a lot of different types of glasses you can buy out there for that type of glare and sensitivity. You've probably heard of polarized lenses. There's other types of coatings they can put on your glasses to help block some of that glare and some of that sensitivity to light. But there are some people where we just don't really have a good reason, and it's just the way it is. Sure. Question right here.
I've had a problem for probably half my life. I used to attend briefings and look at the slides and things on the screen. When I wear glasses and I focus on the screen, I seem to get a little lightheaded. When I drive and I look around, I'm fine. And I've gone for eye exams every year. Nobody's ever been able to find out anything that causes it.
That's a good question. So I have a young man here who, when he looks up at these types of screens and looks at the screen, he notices a lightheadedness and a discomfort?
Yeah, and I've always worn glasses because that's the last half of my life, so.
Yeah.
Yes.
So yeah, that's a tough one to answer. I haven't heard that one before. But let me take a swing at it. I think that it's possible. So some people, when they look at certain distances, the muscles in their eyes may be functioning a little bit too strong. So one way to think about it is whenever you change focus in your eyes, there's actually 3 different muscles that we use. One muscle is the actual pupil. So your pupil changes size, it becomes bigger or smaller. Another muscle is your 2 eyes actually come a little closer together when you're focusing on something. If you look at something further away, they tend to move further apart. And then there's one other muscle which is inside of your eyes. There's a muscle that actually surrounds the lens in your eye, and that muscle tends to relax or become more stiff based on how far away you want to see something. So those 3 muscles taken together, sometimes when they work together and they have to work really hard to see at a certain distance, maybe whether it's up close or maybe further away, sometimes it can cause a problem called asthenopia. It's a fancy term. It just means eye strain. So it's possible that maybe you're having some eye strain related to that distance. And that might have something to do with where your glasses are targeted. Or it's also possible that maybe your eyes have to work really hard to keep your eyes together at that distance. And that's why you start to get a little lightheaded because those muscles are working too hard. That's my guess. And usually something like that might improve with some type of a tinkering on your eyeglass prescription. Maybe changing it up a little bit and finding if they can find something that works better for you. That would be my guess. So the question is eye exercises. Yes, there are some eye exercises, and that could indeed help. But those eye exercises are varied. Some eye exercises are better for distance vision, some are better for near vision. And so typically, I couldn't tell you now which exercise to do, but depending on what your measurements are, there might be some ways to strengthen those muscles so that they don't get worn out as easy.
Thank you.
Yeah, and I got a question right here.
The earlier slide on the glaucoma.
Right, we always make sure that that's it.
Yes.
Majority of them.
Yes. So the question is, when it comes to glaucoma, certain ethnicities are indeed more likely to develop it, and that's a genetic thing. And so there were actually 2 big studies. There's a study called the Baltimore Eye Study, which was done in the 80s, and there was another study called the Ocular Hypertension Study, done in the early 90s. And both of those studies are the ones that showed that African American heritage gives you a much higher risk factor, actually. And why that is, most likely there's one gene, which I don't remember the name of the gene. I think it's called myocillin. And it's a gene that tends to be more likely found in people of African American heritage. And not just African American, also African heritage too, tend to have a higher risk. And that same gene is the one that we also see in a lot of Latino folks too. There was actually a big study done here in Los Angeles in the early 2000s called the RACE study, R-A-C-E. And that study also found that Latino folks tend to have a much higher risk of glaucoma because they carry that same gene. And speaking of American Indians, they don't tend to carry that gene. But some folks from Alaska, Eskimo Indians, do also have that gene. And they tend to have a higher risk also. And then there's a different type of glaucoma, which is called pseudoexfoliation glaucoma, fancy term. But that type of glaucoma tends to be more commonly seen in people who are from Northern Europe. And that's because they carry a different gene that changes the way the drainage system works inside of the eye. And so those are really the main ethnicities that I tell people that have a higher risk. Other folks usually just have a normal average person risk. But if you are one of those people with that gene, your risk is going to be much higher.
What about the other folks?
So the average person indeed has a risk, and their biggest risk is age. So even if you're Caucasian, if you're Indian, I'm from India, Indian, or if you're Chinese or any other ethnicity, in general, your risk is considered the average risk, and that risk goes up over the age of 55. And there's no real gene link to that. That just tends to be something that happens as a result of aging. So those people don't, in the big studies, those people don't show a higher risk of glaucoma. Okay? I don't know if I answered your question.
Well, you did, but I was concerned about the 5 basic races. And so how many fit into that area in your study that you have referenced?
So in those studies, those were the only races that showed not only that they developed glaucoma earlier, but the glaucoma was actually worse. And in all the other races that were tested in these big studies that were done, none of them really showed a higher risk compared to the average population. So the average population does have a risk of glaucoma. And that risk is largely tied to their age. The older you get, the higher your risk in general. Whereas with folks who are from these ethnicities where your risk is higher, it's not just age. There's something else underlying that is genetic that's causing their risk to be higher. Maybe that'll answer the question a little bit better. Any other questions here?
No, but you have a beautiful daughter.
Well, thank you. Thank you very much. I appreciate it. I think our time might be up, and so I think, oh, yes.
Can you spell Mississippi with one I?
No, you cannot.
N-I.
Very clever.
Ask them.
I like that. I want to use that the next time.